As with any other new build, I'm going to start with the prep work on the body and then move on to primer and paint, of course. So firstly, I scribed out all the panel lines to make them a bit deeper so they don't get filled up with paint and disappear after painting has been finished. So after scribing all of them out, I can move on to the next stage, and that is marking all of the mold lines. Mold lines are not supposed to be there, they are left from the molding process and you want to remove them. So I firstly just start with marking them out with a permanent marker. In this case I'm using a black marker as that is highly visible and can also be used as a guide coat. A guide coat meaning that I mark them off, and when I start sanding the black starts to disappear. With it all disappeared or removed, so will the mold line be in this case as well. Now that all of them have been located and marked with a permanent marker, I can take out my sanding sticks to carefully start removing them. The sanding sticks are a bit rough of a grit, so I need to refine that with a higher grit, and while I'm refining those, I'm also sanding the rest of the body to give the primer a bit of a bite to stick to the plastic. After all of the sanding is done, I clean up the body, remove all of the dust from the panel lines, stick some parts with some double-sided tape to a couple of sticks, also place the body on a Tamiya spray stand and start applying primer. The gray primer is covering nicely on the blue of the body, so another 5 minutes, a fill up of the airbrush with some more primer, and a second coat is enough to fully cover it before moving on to the color. The application of the 2 coats of primer went really smooth, so I just let it sit and dry for about 15 minutes before moving on to the color coat. Now normally I would let it sit and dry for about 30 to 60 minutes and give it a light sanding with some 3000 grit sandpaper. In this case the primer was so smooth that it didn't really help to do that and could only cause more problems, so I figured I could skip that step and move on to the next stage, and that is of course applying the color. As you can see from this first coat, the blue covers really nicely. Even though it was a super thin coat, it still covered pretty well. So another 5 minutes of cure time, a fill up of the airbrush, and a second coat was applied in the same way the first was. So like I said, the first coat covered really nicely, the second coat covered even nicer, and with that it could have been done, but just to be sure that I covered every square centimeter of the body and didn't really have any weird stripes or parts that weren't really covered as well as others, I applied a third and final coat before letting it dry so I can apply the decals in a later stage.